I want you to take a second and really evaluate the literal physical noise in your daily life.
Oh, that is a heavy question right out of the gate.
Right, but just think about it. If you were to map out the acoustic landscape of an average Tuesday, what does it actually sound like?
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's constant. I mean, you wake up to a digital alarm.
Which is essentially a synthesized emergency siren.
Exactly. You start your day with the siren, and then you immediately transition to the pinging of a smartphone screen, the rapid-fire dialogue of a morning news broadcast, or maybe a fast-paced video.
Mm-hmm. And that's before you even leave the house.
Right. Then you've got the low-frequency rumble of a refrigerator, the roar of traffic outside your window, the absolute cacophony of an open-plan office.
Oh, the open plan office is the worst for this.
It really is. And then there's the sudden sharp chime of calendar notifications just dictating your every hour.
Yeah, that is a massive sensory onslaught.
And that is just the external environment. Beneath all of that, perhaps the loudest and most exhausting noise of all is the relentless internal hum of a mind in absolute overdrive, constantly trying to process all of this.
Which is genuinely exhausting on a biological level.
It is. But what if the antidote to all that overwhelming, chaotic noise wasn't, absolute pin drop silence?
Right.
What if you didn't have to retreat to a sensory deprivation tank or a mountaintop to find relief? What if the cure to the noise of modern life was actually a very specific, highly intentional kind of sound?
That is the exact paradox we are exploring today. And it represents a profound paradigm shift for anyone feeling burnt out by our modern acoustic environment.
Welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack the massive modern trend of sound healing, acoustic therapy, and the ubiquitous sound bath.
Yeah, we really want to find out what is actually happening on a biological, neurological, and physical level to our minds and bodies when we immerse ourselves in these curated acoustic experiences.
To do this, we are pulling from an incredibly comprehensive, practitioner-focused source text. It's a manual called The Sound of Stillness, a practical introduction to sound healing, sound baths, and the art of holding vibrational space.
Published by Kasa Yoga Studios.
Yes, exactly. And reading through this material, I mean, it is an absolute goldmine of structural information.
It really is.
Yeah.
And right out of the gate, I want to establish the tone and the parameters for our analysis today.
Please do, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions here.
Huge misconceptions. When people hear terms like sound bath, healing frequencies, or vibrational space, it is incredibly easy to assume we are diving headfirst into mysticism or pseudoscience.
Or making grand, unverified medical claims.
Exactly. The wellness industry, unfortunately, has a habit of conflating metaphor with medicine. But this source material from Kasa Yoga Studios is refreshingly grounded.
It really focuses on the science, doesn't it?
It does. It is a rigorous look at human physiology, autonomic nervous system regulation, and the highly intentional psychological facilitation of space. It strips away all the performative spectacle of the wellness industry and looks deeply at the biological mechanics.
The mechanics of why a sustained tone actually makes a human being feel the way they do.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand the physiological effects, we need to start by completely redefining what sound actually is.
I do.
Because before sound is packaged as a boutique wellness modality or a trendy class you book on an app, it is a fundamental, inescapable physical experience.
Right. Kasa Yoga Studios points out a foundational truth that we often forget because it's just so basic.
Which is that sound is, at its absolute core, vibrational energy.
Yes, vibrational energy moving through a medium. Usually that medium is the air around us, and that energy moves as waves of mechanical pressure.
What's fascinating here is that we have been socially conditioned to think of sound as a strictly auditory event.
Like something that happens exclusively inside the ear.
Yeah, exactly. But physics tells us that sound is a physical, full-body event.
It's kinetic. When an object moves back and forth rapidly, it creates a physical disturbance.
So let's say a heavy crystal bowl has just been struck by a mallet.
Or even just the human vocal cords vibrating as we speak right now. That rapid movement physically pushes the surrounding air molecules together into a state of compression, and then pulls them apart into a state of rarefaction.
It creates these invisible, undulating pressure waves.
Exactly. They travel outward in all directions, much like ripples in a pond, but in 3 dimensions.
And when those mechanical waves arrive at your body, your auditory system, the eardrum, the tiny bones, the cochlea, it translates those pressure waves into electrical signals.
Signals that your brain recognizes as tone, pitch, rhythm, or texture.
But the text emphasizes that the physical wave itself is colliding with your entire organism.
Yes. It is hitting your skin, your skeletal structure, and the water inside your cells.
Wait, hold on. The skin. I mean, we're taught from kindergarten that ears do the hearing. How does the skin or the skeletal structure process an acoustic wave?
It's really cool. It is a combination of both. Your skin is embedded with mechanoreceptors.
Specifically Pacinian corpuscles, right?
Spot on. Pacinian corpuscles, which are highly sensitive to vibration. This is exactly why you can feel a heavy bass line at a concert vibrating in your chest cavity.
Ah, because the acoustic wave carries enough kinetic energy to physically stimulate the tissue?
Exactly. And furthermore, human bones are excellent conductors of sound.
Bone conduction.
Right. Bone conduction bypasses the outer and middle ear entirely, transmitting vibrations directly to the inner ear. So when you are in a room with highly resonant instruments, you are not just decoding information with your auditory cortex.
Your entire somatic system is registering the pressure changes in the room.
Exactly.
That reframes the entire experience for me. I want you, the listener, to imagine touching the side of a large, ringing singing bowl.
Or even putting your hand against a piano while a heavy chord is struck.
Yes. If you've ever done this, you know that intense, almost ticklish, buzzing physical sensation against your skin.
It's undeniable.
What the text is suggesting is that this physical buzz is happening in the air around you all the time when a sound is made. You are literally sitting in a vibrating field of air.
It's almost like being submerged in water and feeling a current pass by you.
That is an excellent analogy. And the specific frequency of those waves, measured in hertz, dictates how you experience them physically and psychologically.
Right, because low frequencies, for example, have very long, slow waves.
And because of their length, they wrap around objects and penetrate deeply into physical structures.
Exactly. When those slow waves hit you, they often feel heavy, rooted, and incredibly grounding. They resonate in the chest, the diaphragm, the lower body.
Whereas high tones have very rapid, tight, energetic waves.
Those tend to feel bright, spacious, and clarifying, often resonating higher up in the head or the neck.
This physical interaction completely explains why people coming out of sound baths always struggle to articulate the experience.
They usually just say, I can't describe it.
Right. They describe it as something they felt, a physical weight or a lightness, rather than just something they listened to like a song on the radio.
And the source material makes a brilliant, somewhat unnerving point here regarding our environment. Sound is never, ever neutral.
Never. Think about your daily life. If a fire alarm suddenly goes off, your body experiences instant, uncontrollable, involuntary tension.
Your shoulders hike up to protect your neck.
Your heart rate spikes to pump blood to your limbs. Your pupils dilate. You don't decide to do any of that.
The sound commands the physiology.
But conversely, if you hear a slow, sustained, deeply resonant tone, it creates this incredible, almost involuntary feeling of spaciousness and muscular ease.
It commands the exact opposite physiological reaction.
And that automatic response is because we as human beings are evolutionarily wired to orient to sound before we even consciously analyze it.
Right. Our auditory system developed as a primary survival mechanism.
It works in the dark.
It works around corners.
And it works while we are asleep. If you hear a heavy door slam suddenly behind you, your body is already reacting.
Your muscles are twitching, and you are physically turning toward the source of the noise milliseconds before your conscious brain has even formulated the thought, a door just closed.
Sound shakes our attention and influences our physical biochemical state instantaneously. We are basically at the mercy of our acoustic environment.
Which brings us to the massive, inescapable trend we are seeing everywhere in the wellness space right now.
The modern sound bath.
Yes.
If you haven't been to one of these events, let's paint the visual picture because the aesthetic has become highly standardized.
Very standardized.
You walk into a dimly lit room, usually a boutique yoga studio or a community space. There are yoga mats rolled out in neat rows.
People are settling in with thick blankets, soft bolsters under their knees, maybe eye masks.
Everyone is lying flat on their backs in Savasana, getting completely, totally physically comfortable.
And at the front of the room, there's a facilitator sitting cross-legged, surrounded by this striking, almost sculptural array of instruments.
You have pristine crystal bowls that look like frosted glass, dark brassy Himalayan bowls of varying sizes, delicate hanging chimes.
And usually a massive, dramatic metal gong suspended on a stand.
That is certainly the popular, highly Instagrammable image of the practice.
It is, and it is accurate to the modern commercial format. But our source text is very quick and very firm. in clarifying what a sound bath is not.
This is a crucial distinction for anyone looking to understand the practice.
Absolutely. A sound bath is not a concert.
Right.
It is not a musical performance.
Oh, okay.
It is not a showcase for the facilitator to demonstrate their technical rhythmic skills or to show off how many expensive imported instruments they own.
It is, by definition in this text, an intentionally curated acoustic environment designed specifically and exclusively for receptive awareness.
Receptive awareness, that's the key phrase. So it's fundamentally about the atmosphere and the listener's internal landscape, not the performer's output.
But why is this booming right now? Why are busy, stressed out people in major cities paying money and flocking to these rooms just to lie on the floor and listen to metal bowls hum?
Kasa Yoga Studios diagnoses the modern condition perfectly here. Modern people are chronically, hopelessly overstimulated.
We carry an immense, crushing cognitive load every waking hour.
We are perpetually planning, remembering, reacting, calculating, anticipating.
The text posits that sound baths offer a commodity that has become incredibly, shockingly rare in our modern society.
The permission to simply stop.
The permission to stop. It is the ultimate acoustic antidote to visual overload and fragmented attention.
If you break down a typical day, think about how much of your waking life requires active, aggressive, analytical processing.
Reading complex work emails.
Deciphering the tone of text messages.
Navigating heavy traffic. Consuming fast-paced, highly edited short-form videos on your phone.
Every single one of those activities requires your brain to actively dissect, interpret, and categorize information. It is exhausting metabolic work for the brain.
But sound, in this specific context, doesn't ask you to do any of that.
No. It doesn't ask you to analyze syntax or decipher meaning or form a counter-argument.
A slowly fading tone from a crystal bowl doesn't require an opinion.
It doesn't need a response. It simply invites the nervous system to shift from active processing to passive receiving.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because as much as this feels like a brand new glossy wellness trend birthed in the age of boutique fitness and social media.
Right, the whole aesthetic of it.
Exactly. The underlying mechanics of it really aren't new at all.
Not even a little bit.
Long before there were wellness studios charging $30 for a drop-in class, human beings across the globe were using the human voice, resonant drums, and cast bells for rituals, for psychological transitions, and for communal regulation.
So is the modern sound bath just a rebranding of an ancient practice? Or is Kasa Yoga Studios pointing to a specific historical precedent?
Well, the history of acoustic application is vast, and the text emphasizes a very important sociological point. Ancient cultures did not need modern scientific language.
They didn't need MRI machines to track brainwave states.
And they didn't need the vocabulary of frequency and hertz to observe that certain sounds profoundly affected the human psychological experience.
They observed through empirical practice that a steady, driving rhythm could organize communal movement.
That low-frequency chanting could unify a group's breathing.
And that the sudden, sharp strike of a bell could instantaneously signal a shift in attention and interrupt distracting thoughts.
We see this deeply embedded in Indian spiritual traditions where sound, chanting, and mantras are highly sophisticated pathways to altering internal awareness.
And we see it in East Asian monastic traditions, where massive, incredibly heavy cast bells are used to mark time and abruptly, sharply interrupt ordinary, mundane attention, calling monks back into a state of acute presence.
I'm so glad you brought that up because the source text is very careful to do some important, necessary myth-busting here.
Oh, the myth-busting is so needed in this space.
It really is. If you look at the marketing for a lot of these modern events, you see the phrase ancient Tibetan sound healing bowls everywhere.
Oh, yeah. It implies an unbroken mystical lineage of monks using these specific metal bowls to cure ailments for thousands of years.
Yes, and this is where the concept of integrity in facilitation, which the text heavily emphasizes, really comes into play.
The manual is remarkably transparent about this.
It is. It points out that while metal bowls certainly have a long, documented history in the Himalayan regions, primarily for domestic use, food storage, or as standard ritual offerings.
Right, everyday items.
The highly specific, medicalized wellness claims attached to them in the modern Western sound healing industry are mostly a contemporary invention.
The idea that a specific bowl was forged centuries ago, specifically to heal your root chakra, is a modern marketing narrative.
The entire modern sound bath structure where people lie flat on yoga mats while a single facilitator plays a diverse global array of instruments from different cultures is a contemporary convergence.
It is a modern synthesis, a
Yes.
product of a globalized wellness culture.
And what's refreshing about the Kasa Yoga Studios approach is they argue there is absolutely nothing wrong with that contemporary synthesis.
Exactly. It is a beautiful, highly effective format that we've created to address a modern problem.
But true integrity as a practitioner means acknowledging this modern context. You don't need to invent an ancient mystical lineage or rely on pseudo-historical marketing to validate the practice.
The tangible, measurable fact that a resonant acoustic field helps chronically stressed people downregulate in a chaotic world is entirely validation enough.
It doesn't need a mythology to make it valuable.
Precisely. The value lies in the physiological reality, not
Right.
the mythology.
And speaking of that physiological reality, that downregulation, that is really the core of the science of stillness that the text explores in depth.
The biological why behind the practice. Why does acoustic resonance actually change our internal state?
Let's dig deep into that biological mechanism. We mentioned the fire alarm versus the slow tone earlier. But on a mechanical level, why does the sound of rain drumming on a roof calmly put you to sleep? But the sound of a distant, faint police siren makes your shoulders tense up and ruins your focus.
What is the sequence of events happening inside the body?
It all comes down to the architecture of the autonomic nervous system, specifically a concept called neuroception.
Neuroception.
Yes, your nervous system is continuously running a subconscious background scanning program, evaluating every single piece of sensory input from your environment.
And it is always relentlessly
Mhm.
asking one fundamental primal question.
Is this safe?
Is this neutral?
Or is this a threat?
Wait, is that scanning happening even when I feel relatively relaxed? Even if I'm just sitting on my couch reading a book, am I still actively scanning for threats?
You don't consciously feel it happening because it's a subcortical process. It is happening in the older, more primitive structures of the brain, like the amygdala, long before the information reaches your conscious awareness in the prefrontal cortex.
It is a biological survival mechanism that never turns off.
To understand how sound manipulates this, we have to look at the two main pole or branches of the autonomic nervous system.
On one end, you have the sympathetic branch, which we often call the activation state.
This is your alertness, your fight or flight stress response, your mobilization, your physical effort.
You absolutely need this state to survive. You need it to cross a busy street safely, to catch a falling glass, or to meet a high-stakes deadline at work.
On the other end of the spectrum, you have the parasympathetic branch, which we call the regulation or restoration state.
This is the physiological state of deep rest, cellular recovery, immune function, and digestion.
The profound problem, as the text outlines, is that modern life has us chronically, sometimes permanently, tilted toward that sympathetic activation pole.
We are rarely running from actual predators, but we are constantly, incessantly receiving micro cues of urgency.
A harsh email tone, a traffic horn, the hum of a crowded subway.
These are all interpreted by the primitive brain as minor threats, keeping a slow drip of cortisol and adrenaline in our system. We are always on.
And this is exactly where sound transitions from being a pleasant aesthetic experience into a biological tool.
Sound can provide a coherent, steady, undeniable cue to the nervous system that definitively suggests safety.
When you hear a slow, sustained, highly predictable tone, like the long, unwavering hum of a singing bowl, it tells those primitive parts of your brain that there is no immediate emergency.
A predator does not make a slow, resonant, relaxing hum.
Chaos is cacophonous, safety is harmonic.
By providing an acoustic environment that signals a total lack of urgency, the body is given the biological permission to automatically shift gears.
Moving away from the activation pole and settling heavily into the regulation pole.
Let's break down the physical mechanics of how that transition into rest actually happens in real time, starting with the breath.
Because the text points out how deeply intertwined auditory processing and respiration really are.
Think about that startle reflex we mentioned earlier. If a book drops loudly on a hardwood floor, what happens?
Your entire body jolts, and you experience an automatic, involuntary inhale spike. You gasp.
It is your body instantly pulling in oxygen to prepare to fight or run.
But a long, resonant, decaying tone from a large instrument does the exact biological opposite.
It acts as an external acoustic invitation for a natural, slow, extended exhale.
And that extended exhale is the critical physiological trigger. When your exhale becomes longer than your inhale, it stimulates the vagus nerve.
Which is the superhighway of the parasympathetic nervous system.
That stimulation signals the heart to slow down, blood pressure to drop, and muscles to release tension.
But beyond just regulating the breath, sound works powerfully through the mechanism of redirection.
We talked extensively about the crushing cognitive load of modern life. When someone first lies down on a mat in a sound bath, their mind is likely racing at a million miles an hour.
They're thinking about their grocery list, an awkward conversation they had yesterday, their financial anxieties.
But a tone is fundamentally simpler than a complex, linguistically structured thought.
As a bowl is struck and that pure sound slowly, incrementally fades into silence, it gives that incredibly busy, overworked mind a single, uncomplicated sensory object to follow.
It interrupts the momentum of overthinking.
It isn't just a shallow distraction like scrolling through a phone to forget a bad day. It is a total redirection of neurological focus.
You literally cannot stress about tomorrow's quarterly review meeting if your brain's processing power is entirely occupied with tracking the subtle, microscopic decay of a physical sound wave in the present moment.
It brings you forcefully into the now.
And for that redirection to be effective, it requires two physical properties: resonance and duration.
Resonant sounds linger. They don't just happen abruptly and vanish into the air like a hand clap or a dog bark.
They create a sustained field of sound that exists over time.
This extended duration is critical because the human nervous system is like a massive cargo ship.
Ooh, I love that analogy from the text. The cargo ship.
It's perfect, right?
Yeah.
It takes time to turn around. It doesn't drop from high stress to deep relaxation in 3 seconds.
The duration of the sound gives the physical body, the heart rate, and the breath the actual temporal space they need to catch up, synchronize, and entrain with the calming stimulus.
So to create this necessary duration, this lingering acoustic field, we need the right physical tools.
Let's walk through the practitioner's toolkit. Kasa Yoga Studios breaks down the primary instruments beautifully, but they preface it with a golden rule.
A rule that I think applies to almost any discipline, but is vital here. Instruments are tools, not the practice itself.
That is a vital, non-negotiable distinction for anyone attempting to facilitate.
The true practice is the act of holding space, observing the room, and facilitating the nervous system shift for the participants.
The bowls, the chimes, and the gongs are merely the physical objects used to achieve that shift.
A master carpenter isn't defined by the brand of their hammer.
And a master facilitator isn't defined by the price of their singing bowls.
Let's look at the most famous, iconic tools in the modern arsenal, crystal singing bowls.
These are the ones you see everywhere on social media that look like large, opaque, frosted glass cylinders.
Or sometimes perfectly clear quartz.
They are known for producing these incredibly luminous, pure, highly penetrating tones.
The facilitator plays them by gently striking the side with a silicone or suede mallet.
Or by firmly rubbing the mallet around the top rim to create sustained friction, causing the bowl to literally sing with a continuous note.
But the text comes with a very stark warning about these specific instruments.
They do, because crystal bowls are incredibly powerful tools.
From a physics standpoint, a high-quality crystal bowl produces an almost perfect sine wave.
A single, incredibly pure, unwavering frequency.
Because that frequency is so concentrated and lacks the dampening complexity of other materials, the sound waves can easily compound and become entirely too loud.
Particularly if they're being played in a small room with low ceilings or hard reflective surfaces like mirrors or hardwood floors.
A facilitator has to develop immense sensitivity to volume.
If they play a crystal bowl too aggressively, what is meant to be a soothing, clarifying tone can suddenly border on a harsh, piercing siren.
Instead of signaling safety, it signals a threat, triggering an activation stress response in the listener's nervous system.
The line between medicine and poison is the dose, and the same applies to the volume of a crystal bowl.
Contrast that with the Himalayan singing bowls.
These are the classic, usually dark, metallic bowls made from various bronze or metal alloys.
They look ancient, even if they were made last year.
The text describes their acoustic profile as warm, grounded, highly textured, and incredibly rich in overtones.
While the crystal bowl gives you one laser-focused, pure note, a high-quality Himalayan bowl gives you a complex, evolving chord of layered, interacting harmonic sounds.
And that harmonic complexity is exactly why the text highly recommends Himalayan bowls as the foundational instrument for beginners learning the practice.
The textured sound is inherently more forgiving. They teach a developing facilitator patience and the art of grounding.
A single, solid, well-placed strike on a large, heavy Himalayan bowl produces a deep, rumbling vibration that can acoustically anchor an entire room of restless people.
The sound waves interact with each other as they decay, creating a warbling, pulsating effect that is deeply hypnotic and soothing to the nervous system.
Moving on down the kit, we have chimes, specifically things like koshi chimes or delicate wind chimes.
Visually, they are simple and elegant.
Acoustically, they produce a very different effect. They aren't typically used to carry the heavy lifting of a whole 60-minute session.
You wouldn't just ring a chime for an hour.
No, but they serve a highly specific structural purpose. They're perfect for marking transitions.
A light cascade of chimes cuts through the heavy, low frequencies of the bowls and changes the listener's attention instantly with their bright, sparkling clarity.
They're like a palate cleanser for the ear.
But then we get to the absolute behemoth of the toolkit.
The gong.
Gongs create these immense, dramatic, overwhelmingly powerful, and constantly evolving fields of sound.
You strike a large gong, and the sound doesn't just ring. It blooms, it morphs, it builds upon itself, creating what acousticians call a wall of sound.
And here is an essential bolded note from the text for anyone wanting to invest in or play a gong. Gongs can very easily become too much in the hands of an untrained, ego-driven, or overly enthusiastic facilitator.
The physical mechanics of a gong mean that the sound waves crash into each other, creating complex interference patterns.
Because the sound built on itself and expands exponentially, it is terrifyingly easy to completely overwhelm the acoustic environment and the listener's nervous systems.
A skilled practitioner knows how to gently coax a bloom from the metal, creating a supportive, ocean-like wave of sound.
An unskilled practitioner just hits it, creating a smash that turns the room into an aggressive wall of noise.
The gong requires the highest level of restraint.
Finally, we have the original, most ancient, and most portable instrument of all.
The human voice.
The source text elevates this, calling it the most intimate instrument in the entire space because it comes directly from the biological body of the facilitator.
It carries undeniable human presence.
It can be utilized in various ways, from deep, resonant humming to rhythmic chanting to simply offering a few carefully spoken, guided breathing cues.
It connects the listener back to a sense of shared mammalian humanity.
The human voice is profoundly regulating. When a facilitator hums, they are not only producing an external sound wave for the room, but the vibration of their vocal cords is internally stimulating their own vagus nerve, calming their own nervous system.
And the overarching takeaway here regarding the entire toolkit is a lesson in restraint.
Anyone learning this practice must understand that a master facilitator does not need to drain their bank account buying every shiny, newly marketed acoustic instrument.
Depth of skill with a few core tools is vastly, exponentially superior to shallow breadth with 50 different instruments.
You are infinitely better served deeply understanding the complex overtones and decay rate of a single, well-made Himalayan bowl, learning exactly how to soothe a chaotic room with it, then awkwardly and frantically fumbling your way through 20 different crystal bowls, chimes, and drums.
Mastery is about relationship, not inventory.
Which transitions us perfectly, fundamentally, into the actual art of doing this work.
Because buying a $400 bowl on the internet does not make you a facilitator, just like buying a scalpel doesn't make you a surgeon.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human interaction, we have to demand a massive shift in mindset.
The practitioner must transition from the idea of playing sound, which is an outward, performative, egocentric action, to facilitating an experience,
which is a receptive, supportive, environment-centric action.
Anyone with a hand can hit a metal bowl with a stick. Facilitation is an entirely different architecture.
It is about shaping a psychological, physical, and acoustic environment where 20 other people, strangers usually, feel profoundly safe enough to drop their defenses and regulate their own autonomic nervous system.
No, you are building a container of safety.
And the most counterintuitive part of building that container, the absolute secret weapon of a master facilitator that the text highlights, is what they call the invisible instrument.
Silence.
Silence is the foundation. Silence is where the actual physiological magic happens.
It really is, and yet it's the thing people are most terrified of.
Kasa Yoga Studios points out a very common psychological trap. Inexperienced facilitators absolutely panic when faced with silence.
They strike a bowl, they listen to the sound decay, and the moment the room drops into silence, their own anxiety spikes.
They think, oh no, nothing is happening, the participants are getting bored, they are judging me, I need to hit another bowl immediately to prove I'm doing something.
They view silence as dead air, a void that must be filled with content.
But silence in this context is not dead air. Silence is the acoustic canvas upon which the sound is painted.
If you think about the physiological process we discussed earlier, silence is the space where the sound actually lands in the listener's nervous system.
It is the crucial integration period where the body processes the vibration it just received and finalizes the shift into parasympathetic rest.
If a facilitator never allows for a period of absolute silence, they are just subjecting the listener to continuous, relentless, unending sensory input.
Even if it is a beautiful input, it is still an energetic demand, which entirely defeats the overarching purpose of giving their overstimulated brain a break.
Silence allows the psychological anticipation of the next sound to dissolve, bringing the listener into pure presence.
And a huge, undeniable part of becoming comfortable enough to let that silence hang in the room comes down to the state of the facilitator's own internal nervous system.
This concept blew me away. The text states emphatically that the energy of the room simply mirrors the state of the facilitator.
We are social mammalian creatures with mirror neurons.
If you, as the guide sitting at the front of the room, are internally rushed, if you are breathing shallowly into your upper chest, if you are stressed about traffic,
Or if you are mentally performing and worrying about how impressive your sequence sounds.
the listener's nervous systems will subconsciously pick up on that friction. They will feel that subtle tension in the room, and they will not be able to fully relax.
It is an inescapable biological energetic exchange. You simply cannot guide a room full of people into a state of profound, vulnerable, deep rest if your own nervous system is buzzing or high beta wave anxiety, performance pressure, or a desire for validation.
Your internal state is the primary instrument.
This is exactly why the architecture of the session, the pacing, is absolutely everything. You
Yeah.
cannot rush biology.
Let's talk about the architecture of that pacing, because the text doesn't just offer abstract philosophy. It lays out a very specific, deliberate structural arc for a session.
It's not just a random jam session of hitting bowls for an hour.
Exactly. A well-facilitated professional session follows a very deliberate narrative arc.
It begins with the arrival phase. You don't just blast a gong the second people lie down.
You have to gently, slowly transition people from the high-stress energy of the busy street, the subway, the traffic, into the quiet container of the room.
This involves minimal sound, maybe just spoken guidance, and one grounding bowl.
Then you move into the development phase, slowly and intentionally introducing more complex acoustic textures, building the environment.
This leads into the sustain phase,
Yeah.
which is the deep, immersive, oceanic middle of the practice, where the volume and complexity reach their peak, and listeners often completely lose their linear sense of time.
But what goes up must come down.
The descent phase is crucial. You must incrementally thin out the acoustic density, slowly, gently bringing their brainwaves back up to surface awareness so they aren't shocked.
And finally, the closure phase, anchoring them back in their physical bodies and the present moment.
This deeply predictable, reliable contour allows the listener's nervous system to completely trust the structural container you have built.
I love how methodical that is. But how does someone actually train their brain to do this? To hold that kind of space and pace?
Kasa Yoga Studios offers incredibly practical, hands-on, humbling steps for beginners.
They suggest stripping everything away and starting with a 5-minute setup that requires absolutely zero instruments.
You just sit alone in a quiet room, set a timer for 5 minutes, and do a pure listening exercise.
You train your attention to notice the sounds that are already existing in the space. The low-frequency hum of the HVAC system, a distant police siren 3 blocks away.
The settling creak of the building's architecture, your own pulse.
You have to learn to listen to the baseline reality of a room before you try to alter it.
It is an exercise in profound humility and auditory focus. Once you can sit with the baseline, you move to the one-tone practice, which is much harder than it sounds.
You take a single bowl, you strike it one time with a moderate amount of force, and you listen to the resulting wave as it decays until it completely, entirely, undeniably fades into absolute silence.
And then, and this is where the real training happens, you wait. You just sit in the resulting silence.
It forces you to witness just how long a single acoustic event actually lasts in the air.
And it painfully trains you to recognize and resist your own internal, anxious urge to rush to the next sound.
And then they suggest taking that same bowl and practicing dynamic range.
Striking it with a very soft, feather-light touch, then a moderate strike, and then a slightly stronger but never aggressive strike.
And rigorously noticing how your own physical body and breath respond to each subtle level of acoustic intensity.
It is a highly methodical, almost scientific approach to a very artistic practice.
So what does this all mean in a broader context? Why are we doing this massive deep dive today, and who is this specific granular information really for?
This brings us to the core essential focus of our exploration today, the imperative for yoga instructors, movement facilitators, and wellness professionals to deeply understand and integrate this material into their existing practices.
Why must a yoga teacher, whose primary focus is biomechanics and physical asana, care about the physics of sound healing?
It comes down to understanding the baseline state in which their students are arriving to class.
When a person walks into a modern yoga studio today, drops their mat and sits down, they're almost universally arriving in a state of subtle or frequently overt sympathetic overdrive.
They have just rushed from work, navigated traffic, and their cortisol is elevated.
Physical movement, the yoga postures themselves, is a phenomenal, necessary practice for metabolizing that stress.
But physical exertion alone is sometimes not enough to effectively downregulate a highly stressed, chronically anxious brain.
Sometimes telling an overstimulated person to relax and focus on their breath just gives them one more task to fail at, causing more internal friction.
Adding intentional sound is an incredibly powerful physiological bridge.
It's a way to access what the source text brilliantly calls force-free stillness.
You don't have to verbally command a stressed student to forcefully empty their mind or relax their thoughts, which, let's be honest, usually just makes them hyperfixate on the fact that they aren't relaxing.
Instead, you bypass the cognitive mind entirely. You just offer a sustained, resonant acoustic wave, and you let their autonomic physiology do the heavy lifting of relaxing for them.
It is a tool of surrender, not effort.
And it's important to clarify that yoga teachers do not need to suddenly abandon their movement sequences and pivot to leading hour-long, highly specialized sound baths to utilize this power.
The integration strategies for a standard 60-minute vinyasa or hatha class are simple, elegant, but profoundly impactful.
Think about savasana, the final, crucial resting pose at the end of every yoga class.
Introducing a few carefully intuitively placed sounds, perhaps the slow rolling hum of a Himalayan bowl or a gentle sweep of chimes during those final 5 minutes can massively amplify the psychological transition.
It helps the student cross the bridge from the physical, muscular effort of the class into a state of deep cellular restorative rest, preventing their mind from immediately jumping to their to-do list before class is even over.
Or utilizing the power of sound and the thresholds of the experience.
The text talks about the psychological impact of using a single deep grounding tone at the very beginning of a class, right as everyone takes their first seated breath.
That one resonant strike of a heavy metal bowl acts as an impenetrable acoustic boundary.
It serves as a definitive signal to the brain that says, okay, the frantic energy of the outside street is done. We are officially in a different, protected space now.
It's incredibly effective for rapidly shifting group consciousness.
And of course, for slower, more passive formats like restorative yoga or yin yoga, sound pairing is absolutely perfect because those physical practices already prioritize long holds, stillness, and deep internal sensory listening.
The sound simply deepens the container.
But the real ultimate why for yoga instructors goes so much deeper than just providing a nice-sounding aesthetic ambiance for their class.
When a movement teacher truly invests the time to learn the mechanics of sound facilitation, they are actually learning the nuanced, invisible language of the nervous system.
By studying how a room reacts to a decaying tone, they become acutely hyper-aware of pacing.
They learn the vital skill of holding open space without needing to constantly insert their voice, their ego, or their commands into it.
They learn to acutely observe the subtle shifts in the respiratory rate and energetic tension of a room, and they learn to recognize what their students' biological bodies actually need in that exact moment, rather than just forcing them through a pre-planned physical sequence.
It fundamentally matures the instructor. They evolve from being simply a fitness guide who calls out a sequence of physical poses into a true sophisticated space holder capable of facilitating deep nervous system regulation.
This raises an important question, though, and it is an ethical dilemma that the expert text explicitly addresses and does not shy away from.
The absolute necessity of ethics and strict professional boundaries.
Because, as we've seen, with any wellness modality that gains this much explosive commercial popularity, there is an immense, tempting risk of overpromising results to vulnerable people.
Yes, and Kasa Yoga Studios is incredibly explicit, firm and uncompromising about this in their training manual.
Sound must be offered responsibly and ethically.
It is a brilliant, highly effective, scientifically supported physiological tool to support deep rest, to foster contemplative psychological states, and to help down-regulate a chronically stressed autonomic nervous system.
But it's fundamentally not a medical cure.
It is not a replacement for clinical psychotherapy. It is not a substitute for psychiatric care, and it is not a licensed medical treatment for severe trauma or disease.
Honest, transparent positioning is what builds long-term, sustainable trust with a student base.
When you look at a student and tell them, I am offering this acoustic environment to help your body rest deeply, to help your nervous system step away from the edge, and to help you find some peace today, they trust you, and their body responds to that safety.
But the moment you tell a vulnerable person, this specific frequency of this crystal bowl will cure your deep-seated medical trauma or realign your cellular structure, you cross a massive ethical line.
You venture into practicing medicine without a license, and you ultimately damage the long-term credibility, respectability, and viability of the entire sound facilitation practice.
Integrity is the foundation of the practice, and that rigorous commitment to integrity, education, and realistic application brings us perfectly to the underlying philosophy behind our source material today.
Kasa Yoga Studios explicitly states in their manual that they are providing this depth of knowledge, this rigorous breakdown of physics, neurology, and practical facilitation to their students and the wider wellness community because they truly deeply believe in the power of sound healing and sound vibration.
They see it not as a fleeting, superficial wellness trend destined to fade away, but as a profoundly meaningful, physiologically supported tool for modern practitioners trying to survive in a chaotic world.
They want to elevate the entire field through education, stripping away the mystery and replacing it with mastery.
It is a phenomenal, necessary mission for the modern wellness landscape. And as we wrap up this massive deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you transition back into the reality of your day.
Think deeply about the invisible acoustic environment that you curate for yourself every single day.
If we accept the scientific reality that sound is a physical, kinetic event that literally biologically shapes the state of your autonomic nervous system, what is the soundtrack of your daily life quietly commanding your physical body to do?
Are you continuously, unknowingly bathing yourself in a chaotic soundscape of urgency, alarms, and tension?
Or are you taking the time to intentionally curate pockets of space, utilizing sound to cue your body towards stillness, safety, and regulation?
The power to shift your internal state might just be waiting in the way you interact with the acoustic world around you.
That is such a powerful, vital question to carry with you this week. Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive deep dive into the mechanics of sound. As you step away from this conversation and move through the rest of your day, I highly encourage you to seek out just one intentional moment of profound silence or one sustained resonant tone. See what happens to your breathing and your body when you finally let the noise fade away. We will talk to you next time.